No.
Okay.
Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you all so much for being here today. Really appreciate it. My name is Blake Harris. I'm the project manager for this project, and I'd like to thank ArtsBuild for letting us use their space today, and Lyndhurst Foundation for all their support, and of course all of you. Many, if not most of you, have participated in this process, and so we're really grateful. Before we begin, I'd like the consultants to introduce themselves, and then I will turn it over to Duncan. So, Robert, please start us off.
I'm Robert Long. I'm a theater planning consultant from Theater Consultants Collaborative, and I think, met some of you all a month or so ago when we were here earlier. So glad to be back.
I'm Adam Beery with PBK Architects. Happy to be here today and share these exciting possibilities with y'all.
And I'm John Hansen. I was here again about 2 months ago, and pleasure to be back and pleasure to see some of those that we met the first time. And I'm an architect with with PBK Architects.
And quick reminder to use volume just to get all the way to the back. Thank you.
Okay. And I'm Duncan Webb. I'm the management consulting part of the team, here to share my work today. So it's a big day. We are presenting physical, operational, and financial plans for a set of wonderful new community-serving arts facilities for Chattanooga. Robert, Adam, and John are going to get into the physical planning work, and then I'm going to talk about the business planning work a little bit later. But before we get into that, just a quick reminder on how we got here. So we were hired first, I think it was a year ago or so. We came into town to answer the question, what, if anything, do we need to advance artists and small arts organizations in this community? We did that work and we came back and said, great idea. Let's develop a set of small performance facilities, rehearsal facilities, education spaces, and production facilities. And we then, ArtsBuild and the Lyndhurst Foundation said, right, let's now get some physical planners involved to kind of figure out what that means physically. So they went through a process and hired PBK and Theater Consultants Collaborative to then say, here's what we're talking about physically. So functionally, what are the spaces, the sizes, the capacities, the flexibility, the functionality, what do they cost, how do they all combine together? The challenge with that work is that we knew it would be too early to look at specific sites because there's no money yet to do anything, and as soon as you start identifying potential site, the price goes up. So we asked the team to approach this in a slightly more generic way, come up with some development scenarios, how we might develop this set of facilities in different ways, in different types of sites over time. So I think these guys have done an amazing job turning sort of very early recommendations into physical plans and budgets. So let's hear what they did. Robert, why don't you start?
So John?
Yep.
So Duncan prescribed that what he had understood from talking with you all was that what would be needed would be a 100 seat, 200 seat, 400 seat set of theaters and rehearsal rooms, shop spaces, scenery, costumes, props, and administrative and services. So different components. So we created the space program. It's hard to see. I'm going to explain what it does. It's got a column for each of the 3 theaters. Each theater has its front of house, its actual theater space, and its back of house spaces. What it needs if it were to be built all or achieved all on its own. Each one. So each one of these 6 columns across the top could be created separately from the others and in a different time frame. So it's really looking for as much flexibility as possible. But we go down to the bottom, and this is where it summarizes, and we have net square feet. Net square feet is the distance between walls where you can actually do something. gross square feet is when you add the corridors, mechanicals, restrooms, and everything. So the bottom line is gross square feet for each of these components. So the next step that we took was to take each of the 3 theaters,
Sorry.
and just do a little thumbnail. The purpose is, if, let's say, we found a space that we wanted to look at, could we put a 100-seat theater with lobby and back of house into that space? So it's dimensioned of width, length, and height. And it's just it's a tool that then the architects took, and you'll see that in a moment. So we did the 100-seat, the 200-seat, microphone. Thank you. This is going to help a lot. So the middle theater is looking more like the theater. The first one, the 100-seat, very flexible. It could be in the daytime. Sorry to jump around. In the daytime, it could be a rehearsal room. At night, it could be a performance space. The second space also with, in this case, a telescopic seating unit, push button, the floor clears. It's a rehearsal room and then a performance room when needed. The third theater, the 400-seater, is much more conventional in terms of a 400-seat theater, the auditorium stage, fly height of some height, but again with lobby and back of house. So with these thumbnails and dimension, we gave them to the architects, who then began to assemble them in the ways that they're going to explain.
Thank you. So I'm going to first show you the area. So we were asked to look at the area of Chattanooga to get a better understanding of the city and all the different districts. And so we spent some time in each of those areas to get a feel for the different types of buildings that would be available possibly for a facility like this, or property. And so the scenarios that you're going to see are based on things that we observed as we were here reviewing all these different areas and neighborhoods. But they do not, like Robert said, they do not reflect, or Duncan said, they do not reflect a certain site. So they're not site specific, but they generally carry what we discovered as we observed. So the first scenario is a single new building, where all the different phases would be in one building versus in different buildings. There's something common among the 3 scenarios that we'll present to you. First of all, they're all phasable. In other words, not everything is done at once. So as Robert described the program, he described the different types of performance spaces. Each of those spaces could be phased, so they're not necessarily all at once. And so we've done this with each scenario. We have those performance spaces phased. The 400-seat theater, which likely would have a stage house, we show that as a new building in all the scenarios. It's very difficult to find an existing building that will be able to facilitate a theater like that. So we have assumed that will be a new theater. We also strongly suggest with all the scenarios that you find a property that's near parking to avoid the cost of providing the parking itself. So that will be a benefit to the project if that can happen. And then finally, of all the spaces that are in the program that Robert presented, the production facilities like the scene shop, the prop storage, we feel that would be that if anything could be divided or put on a different property, that's the component that could be somewhere else. That would allow you to find less expensive real estate, or a building that is not very expensive and will house all the things that you need to house in that particular space. So all the scenarios that you'll see today assume those 4 things that I just shared with you. But again, going back to this first scenario, it's a single new building. Being single meaning that everything's under one roof, everything's connected, that there's no space between each building. And with that, you get some savings, cost savings with building that way. So I'm going to hand it over to Adam to walk through the scenario.
Sure. So all these scenarios you'll see as we walk through them are kind of program diagrams. They're not necessarily a design or an architecture. It's just kind of a diagram to show the spaces and how they give you a sense of the scale of these size buildings. So we started with an average size block that we've seen in Chattanooga. This is roughly around 6 acres. It could go all the way up to maybe 9 acres. To give you an example, I mean, that's probably like the size of like a Walmart parking lot, or like a side of a grocery store parcel. So this is that first program, including that for the 100-seat thumbnail that Robert's team worked on, with also some additional program elements that we feel would be needed to function in the first phase of the venue. So you see the lobby shown in yellow, with admin offices in red that would help serve the facility. Stage support is kind of the lighter purple, and rehearsal space is shown in the blue. These could be classrooms, but also serve as small performance spaces. Give you an idea of kind of the size of this. The light blue is your production shops. These could be taking, I mean, you could potentially phase production shops as your first phase and just build that type of space because it's more of a raw space. So these could kind of go one or the other. You could kind of take it either way. But give you a sense of the size of what that building would be. Is roughly the kind of the size of an average size grocery store. We are looking at in each of these having some spaces for on-site parking. You would need to have ADA parking on-site. Your load in, load out, and you're just parking for everyday staff that are there during the days. But we are this scenario here would have to rely on off-site parking. You can see the parking numbers for as we build through the phases. Just give you a sense of what we think would be needed for parking either on-site or off-site for a facility like this. So phase 2, we would add the 200-seat theater and try to connect onto the existing lobby space that was built in phase 1. So phase 1, you're building your concessions, your bathrooms. So this would be kind of a more simple addition. You're just adding more lobby space or more people flow space to get to that 200-seat theater. And kind of to give you kind of a feeling for what that size would be is kind of the size of like a Walgreens or a CVS. And the 400-seat theater is a much larger building. We could be built in a way that is still compact with the building and able to connect to the lobbies and utilize those spaces as efficiently as possible. So you can see here, this is kind of the full build out. It does give you room for activating the site in different ways. You could have potential outdoor performance space and as well as the parking. And then these are just to help give a sense of what it could be. When you're building new, you can always have the building be whatever architecture you want. You're not necessarily relying on an older building or a historic structure. So you really could shape this and be a unique venue to kind of celebrate the arts. The next slide kind of gives you a feel of the size of some of these performance spaces. So the lower right-hand corner is an example of a 100-seat theater. The upper picture here is kind of an example of a 400-seat theater. And then some pictures of production shop spaces, costume spaces, and then classroom and rehearsal spaces.
Thanks, Adam. So that's scenario number 1. Scenario number 2 is looking at taking the program that was presented and dividing it into separate buildings. So instead of it being all under one roof like scenario 1, scenario 2 scatters the program or the different performance spaces and production areas into different buildings. This allows you to either have a campus approach, so if it was in a downtown district and there are a number of different buildings in the area that that you could that were available. That they could all be purchased and used as a part of a campus-like plan. Or if they're scattered about the whole area, you could have one performance space in one neighborhood and another performance space in another neighborhood. So you're covering the city in a different way that way versus a campus. You're everywhere. So that's what distinguishes this particular scenario. So what you're going to see when Adam presents is you're going to see it in a campus approach, not in the scattered approach. But when you look at each phase, just imagine that building could be somewhere else. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the same block as Adam presents it. But we do believe that phase one in this particular scenario would be an existing building. It could be a historic building that's restored. If it's in an area or part of town that where you could find property like that. And again, it allows, the benefit of this is allows you to address the community in different areas if it's scattered. Or if it's on the same block, you're allowed to really reflect the context of that particular block and create some very interesting green spaces in between where people can gather and connect. So Adam, here you go.
So just to reiterate, this is all make-believe, so it's not, it may look real, but it's not a specific site. But give you a feel, this is looking at maybe a historic structure, maybe a building like this, and how we might fit that first program that you saw in phase one, or the scenario one, into a building like this. So really what you would want to try and find in an old building like this is a column-free space that you're able to fit that thumbnail image that Robert showed, and to fit the volume of that space within a building that would be easily added or done without a lot of modifications to the structure. So this shows the 100-seat theater with rehearsal spaces, some stage support spaces, admin offices that would be located probably off the street so people could easily get to the admin areas, and then lobby space off the main street as well. We are looking at doing the production shop facility off-site in this scenario, so we feel like this is a type of architecture that could be more affordable and maybe might be expensive to build in a urban setting like this, where you may could go somewhere, another location, and find an old warehouse or an old metal building, and be able to move those type spaces or type of program in really quickly versus building new. Phase two, the 200-seat theater in this scenario is showing a new building. Could be, again, if you have the advantage of finding another old building that would work for this, I mean, it would be great, but we do show adding a new building here, and then working around the existing context of the city, and then trying to activate the spaces in between these different theaters. And this shows what adding a 400-seat theater would look like, and working within the context of the downtown setting, and really trying to create kind of, as John mentioned, a campus feel, and having the different buildings work together, because you want them to be close enough that they can, the program spaces can share, and you're able to work together. And these are just some examples of how we could retrofit old historic structures, and how or you could add on new buildings to fit within that context, to reutilize these old buildings to have new uses and fit within the downtown context. And then, again, some examples of theater or performance spaces in buildings like this. So I think the section in the middle shows it as a good example of how you take a building like we're in today and maybe take a part of the floor out, and you're creating a high volume space for maybe the 100-seat theater. Just some examples of ways that you could do this fairly easy.
So the third, again, to summarize the second scenario, campus-like or scattered, where you have different venues throughout the city or in a city area for the campus approach. And again, it allows you to use smaller real estate, smaller buildings with some character, as well as mixing in new structures. Scenario 3 looking at a large building that you could renovate. And of course, the larger theater would have to be new. This large building could be an old factory, could be an old grocery store or Walmart, something has been neglected, but a big space with open area, which would allow you to have performance spaces, workshops, all the things that you need to do your work. And so I'm going to have Adam walk through it.
So with this one, we showed kind of an old mill, which we've seen a lot of, or an old warehouse. We've seen a lot of these in Chattanooga. It may be a scenario where there's a developer involved and you're working around other program space. There may be mixed-use development, maybe apartments, but you're able to move in to what is available. So the first phase shows adding that program in this wing you see here, and retrofitting that space to house this program. Maybe you're not renovating the entire building, but just the area that you're able to do. In a scenario like this, we would probably have to rely on on-site parking, or I mean, it just depends. So hopefully, you'll be able to find a spot that may have parking nearby, but parking would also be a challenge really in all these scenarios. Production shops is shown on site here. In our tours around Chattanooga, we notice a lot of these old warehouses, so we feel like you may very easily find a scenario that's close to this, where you might have an old metal building that's easily, or next door, or a block away, that could function easily as your production shop space. And then again, phase 2 is the 200-seat theater. This shares the lobby space with the 100-seat theater. Just continuing the building of that space. And then the 400, as John mentioned, is a new building. We try to construct this in a way that fits within the context of these older buildings, and then trying to activate the spaces around them. So this shows a much larger outdoor performance space, and could potentially create an amenity for if there is a developer involved, or another owner of the development or property, for them to utilize this space as well. Again, these are examples just of how these spaces might look with the activated space between the old warehouses and then old mill spaces, how they can be reused. And again, some examples of interior spaces of those type projects.
So with having seen all these scenarios, having walked through them, we just want to briefly talk about costs and what it would cost to develop these. I do want to emphasize that we have been showing phases in a logical way that we see them, but there's no magic to that. As this gets developed through time, an earlier phase might be the production area, and you work your way to a rehearsal and a 100-seat theater. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, and there's not one way. And we wanted to show you, with all these scenarios, flexibility in the approach, so that you all can make the best decisions for what will make this a great facility. So this is the new facility, showing the different phases as we presented them, and the costs related to those. These are average costs. So I show in red costs that could be much lower than that, depending on how you construct the building. The materials have a lot to do with costs, as well as the interior features. So there's not one way to design a performance space. If we showed you all our work, Robert, and showed his work, you could see that we have done this in many ways, in inexpensive ways and very expensive ways. So creativity is within these numbers, and again, they can go lower than what you see here to make these spaces great for your work. So this is a new scenario. If we go on to the next, you can see, again, those averages that we think would be for this particular scenario. Historic buildings, I just want to note that historic buildings traditionally can be very expensive to fix. I mean, a lot of buildings that are historical have a lot of issues that need to be repaired. And if they're historical, especially if they're registered, they need to meet the National Park Historic Places guidelines, which are very, very stringent. So they can be expensive to renovate. So we try to respect that with the ranges that we're showing here on this scenario. And then finally, the last scenario, you can see anytime you can find an existing space that allows does require minor renovations to the outside, but simplifies your renovation on the inside, will save dollars. So again, these ranges are reasonable ranges. They can be lower, and we've done them lower. And production, for example, I did a project where we just did we used a production-like building, a metal building, and we put partitions up and had rehearsal in there and performances in there, and it worked great. People loved it. So there's nothing that's out of the park. It can be simple, and it can be powerful at the same time. So I think that's everything we wanted to present. We're opening it up to questions. Oh, Duncan, did you have something to say?
No, I'm gonna go and then we'll do questions.
Okay, we'll do it after you.
Okay, hold that question.
Here you go, Duncan.
All right. So, whoops. Here we go. So I'm just gonna, for those of you who were not involved in the earlier parts, or just as a reminder, a long time ago, we did the first part of this, and whenever we do it, we ask and answer 4 questions. Is there an audience for new facilities? So who lives here and works here and visits here, and what do they like and what do they want? What will get them up off the couch? Secondly, who are the potential users of facilities? Groups in this room, what do you need and want, and how much would you use them, and how much rent can you afford to pay to use them? Third, what's here now? What are the gaps and deficiencies in the current inventory of facilities, and how do we fill those gaps with this project? And then 4, we say, where is your community going, and how does a project like this help you get there? So what does this project do around economic development or cultural tourism? So we did that work, and we came back and said, yes, there is an audience. Most importantly, there are tons and tons of users needing and wanting space for performance, rehearsal, and production to develop their work. There are a lot of small organizations and emerging artists who are struggling to find performance space, and even more profound, a need for rehearsal space that is not easily satisfied, affordable, accessible, and quality space. Clearly there are gaps in the inventory, and clearly a project like this could be great for Chattanooga in terms of economic development, quality of life, improving the identity and attractiveness of your community to workers, companies, and visitors. So we felt very optimistic about our 4 questions, and on that basis we recommended facilities, small performance facilities, rehearsal/classroom facilities, and production facilities. And this idea that they should be designed to be accessible, affordable, and welcoming, particularly thinking about communities that have not historically had good access to facilities. So I made John and the team create these little charts for me so that I could understand these scenarios in terms of the pieces and the phases and how they came online. What's interesting is that there's not really that much difference in the total size of the project, and the order is pretty similar. The big differences are really how much is new construction versus renovation, or adaptive reuse. So the three charts are sort of similar, and the total gross square footage goes from about 78,000 to 84,000 gross square feet. So I took that as a starting point for me and the business plan. But I want to say that I really liked this idea of the phasing and the order of the phases for several reasons. First of all, the most profound need is for rehearsal space and small performance space, that 100-seat theater. So that should be first. We felt quite strongly about that. Secondly, when you do it that way, you can build an operating organization with smaller pieces and then add skills and capacity as you add the bigger pieces. It's easier to start that way and build larger. There is a logic to building the smaller pieces first because we might be supporting organizations that can grow into bigger spaces later. And finally, starting that way also gives us a little bit of flexibility about what comes later. So it may well be after you get through 2 phases that it turns out that the next piece is needed is not a 400-seat theater, but it's a 600-seat theater. So starting first with the one that we know and feel most confident about is the first piece is the best way to start. We then start the business plan with operating goals, and the most important one is affordable access to high-quality facilities for performance, rehearsal, production, and administration. And then the second one, which is almost as important, is encouraging collaboration and partnerships among and between Chattanooga-based artists and arts organizations. We want to help you build a stronger and more unified community of creators so that you can work better with each other and you can become advocates for your sector in your community. How many of you were here a couple months ago when we did the calendar? Right, so for those of you who weren't here, we took everyone through this really torturous process. We put blank calendars down on the table. We said, let's pretend we're a year away from opening each of these 3 theaters, and they had to write their initials on dots, and they put in their dots down on the calendar, which was difficult and frustrating, but very valuable for us because it helped us get a sense of demand, seasonality, who wants more, what, when, and it reaffirmed a few things for us. Most importantly, and we add, so these are the groups who were here and we're putting dots down on the 100-seat theater. We added a few more groups after the fact, but huge demand for that 100-seat space. Lots of days for performance and rehearsal. And I also love that it's not just theater, it's theater, music, dance, comedy. When we get to up to a second 200-seat theater, it drops off quite a bit, but still pretty good demand. That's 200 days, potential days of use in a 200-seat theater, and again, across multiple disciplines. And we get up to our 400-seat theater that drops a little bit further still, down to about 140 days of use. I don't think that's all the use that these spaces get, because there were lots of groups who weren't here, who would emerge over time. But in all 3 cases, we still feel pretty good that there's demand to use those spaces. We also put out a survey after we were here specifically about the need for rehearsal space. And basically, 80% of the groups we surveyed need rehearsal space across the disciplines. And the most of them were wanting that kind of 2,000 square foot size as a rehearsal space. So that fed into the physical planning work that these guys were doing. In writing the business plan, the most important question is always programming strategy. How are we going to bring this building to life? So here it starts with the rental activity, starting slowly, accepting groups in, keeping rental rates low, and keeping user costs low as well. There might be a little bit of presenting in the building, meaning attracting touring programs. There we would encourage you to think about partnerships with existing organizations to start, whether it's the Tivoli or some of the comedy groups here are already now pretty good at booking touring artists and entertainers. Same thing with education. We want there to be a strong educational component to the building, but rather than create that ourselves, let's work with existing organizations in the communities to support their education programs in the building. We also think there's an opportunity in the building to provide technical training services to emerging artists and organizations, meaning classes in the building on whether it's HR management or technology or technical things. Because we're bringing the community together here, let's build a program around that. And then the last thing is this idea of joint production facilities. So a shop, a scenic, costume, props, the idea of sharing. It doesn't happen a lot, but there are a few good models around the country of places that are able to do this. There's tricky liability issues and protocols and making sure hand tools don't disappear, but it can be done, and we think it's worth a shot. It starts with the idea of sharing space to build your own pieces. It extends to an idea where we create partnerships with community college or vocational schools to bring training programs into these facilities. So teaching seamstresses, painters, carpenters, and that potentially even extends to a model where this set of production facilities can become a contract builder for local groups and for groups throughout the region. So, for example, the Memphis Ballet needs a new Swan Lake. So we will bid on the contract to do that and make $1.5 million to do that. Anyway, so if it's fully developed, it could get to that level theoretically. So who should the operator be? So there are lots of different ways that these spaces can be operated. Ultimately, we landed on the recommendation that it should be a local nonprofit created expressly for this purpose. It means that you can have this transparent, mission-based organization where you, the users, and other key stakeholders are a part of that governance organization, that you can influence the direction of the overall group. We think that's the best model. There is a big fat report that's coming that addresses things like how you do scheduling and how ticketing should be addressed and the importance of food and beverage operations and safety and security. Enough said. So you'll read the report and I'm sure you'll have questions. When the organization is fully developed and we're all the way through 4 phases of development, it's a pretty big team. There's 9 full-time staff, plus some part-time staff and some contract labor. We also, in this report, are going to talk about board development. You know, this board, this nonprofit is going to be very important because it's the organization that's not just going to operate the building. We want it to be the organization that leads fundraising, planning, design, construction, and then preparing for operations and then operations. So building a strong board and a committee structure within that board will be critical to move the organization forward. The most important piece for me in the business plan is always writing a pro forma operating budget, which is what's the budget look like before the building opens and then through all these phases of development. This one's complicated because of the 4 phases, so it's a budget that runs for 9 years. I'm making an assumption that there's a pre-opening year, but then in year 1 we open our 100-seat theater plus our 3 multi-purpose rooms and our 3 shop spaces. Year 3 we add the second theater. Year 5 we add the largest theater, and year 7 we add the outdoor spaces. So I wanted to show that. It may be a little bit ambitious to go 2 years a phase. That's a pretty relentless cycle of fundraising and development. But I didn't want my pro forma to go out 20 years, so I did it that way. So here's what it looks like. If you could do every 2 years, if you could add another phase for these sort of general 3 different scenarios. In year 1, with just our 100-seat theater, we are able to generate earned revenue of about $364,000. We have operating expenses of $1.1 million, and that then leads back to the need for contributed income of about $750,000. So earned income is what we project first, and then expenses, and then come back to this gnarly, really complicated question of how much money do we need to raise every year to sustain facilities. So it starts at 33%. earn. So that is lower than most buildings that we work on. And in fact, we get from 33% for the fully developed project, where it is a $3.5 million annual operating budget, it's 56% earned by them. The earned contributed number is low here because of the point of this project, which is to provide affordable access for small arts organizations to great facilities. So inevitably, it has to be a building that has to raise lots of money to sustain itself. All right, two more quick things we did. One was public sector funders will love to hear about the economic impact of the project. So we projected that there are impacts of construction, but the impact of operations, meaning the combination of this new organization running all these spaces and audiences coming and spending money, means that every year when it's fully developed, it will generate about $3.9 million of new economic activity in the county, $1 million of new earnings, and 23 jobs outside of the building. So in addition to the jobs it creates inside the building, the economic activity drives another 23 jobs outside. And then finally, we did this exercise of showing how you march down the road towards achieving all these phases over time. And it's moving down these three parallel tracks of fundraising, planning and design, and then planning for operations. So all of this is possible and achievable. I'm trying to be realistic about how you can do this. It may well happen slower than this. There are lots of things that can slow these down, but theoretically, we could have our first opening night in the fourth quarter of 2028, and our fourth opening night in the fourth quarter of 2034. All right, so I just want to say a couple more little things. This is always a bit of a bittersweet moment for me, because this is the end of our work, right? We've done our thing. We've investigated the need. We've provided operating recommendations. We provided advice on how to move forward. And now we have to sort of stand aside and let you turn these ideas into reality. It's the right way to do it. We have provided ideas and tools and plans, but now what you have to do is identify and advance the project that makes sense to you in your community. You need to try out locations, you need to look at different development operations, different phasing plans, different sites, and what makes a public and private sector funding is realistic to help not just the construction of these facilities, but the ongoing operation. And as John's already suggested, you might well develop a plan that's quite different from something that we provided with you today. You can still look to John, Adam, and Robert to help you think of these other options and develop them. And they will be there when it's time for you to move into the actual planning and design of facilities. We at Webb Mgmt will be available to coach you, but from the sidelines, because you need to own this now. This is your baby, and it's time now for a group in Chattanooga to kind of come together, find the right project, claim ownership of it, and make it happen. It's a daunting task, clearly, but I think there's a clear need for what could be a transformative project for Chattanooga. And you have a great group here and others we've met who are able to turn these ideas into reality. And that group includes users, funders, and other important stakeholders. So, how does it all sound to you? Does it sound hopeless to anyone? I don't think it's hopeless. I think that there's lots of good information here, but is it the information you need to keep this thing moving forward? And are you ready to roll up your sleeves and play an active role in helping find the right project for your community? What do you think?
have a question for clarification. Our mission here is to focus on community organizations and not necessarily large touring acts coming through. Right.
Yeah, and I would say, 90% of the activity in these buildings is rental activity for local groups.
Okay.
And I think, but even some of the local groups, like some of the comedy groups, they want to book some touring artists and comedians in the town. There may be a dance group here that really wants to book a touring dance company in the town. So it's important to have a little bit of that presenting capability to go beyond the traditional rental business.
Can you elaborate? I only got like a snapshot of the budget. It was only up there for just a second, but
Okay.
I think like an easy bottom line when you're looking at that big budget is just what did you? I saw there's like 175,000 I think for the first year of rental income. Can you break that down? I mean, just in my head, it seems like that's $500 to $700 a night or a day for a rental.
Right. So
And I think like for some organizations of these sizes, like knowing like, hey, if we build this thing, it's projected that it's going to cost us $7, whatever it is. If you can just elaborate on that a little bit, I think.
Yeah. So good comment. So the way that I set rental rates was I did nonprofit rental rates and I did commercial. We talked when we were here a couple of months ago about having resident rates. I haven't done those yet, so the nonprofit rates are probably an average. But the nonprofit rate is based on $3 a seat as a base rate for 24 hours of access into one of these spaces. So for the 100-seat theater, it's $300. It gives you 24 hours, it gives you access to the TV, it gives you access to a base package of information. There are some probably additional charges around use of the box office, if you need any specialized equipment, and some sort of front of house stuff. But the base rate is that $3 a seat, and I've used that same model for all of those. And we benchmark those against rental rates here in Chattanooga and feel like it's a pretty good value proposition there. It's cheaper than most spaces.
Well, I promise I won't ask more questions after this. But so what is the percentage that you calculate out versus like commercial days versus these nonprofit days? Because that also factors in like, if it's $300 a day for nonprofits, obviously that's not enough money to generate the 175. So how many days a year does it have to be used as a commercial rental?
It's different for each space. But the 100-seat theater is like 80%, probably 75% nonprofits. The 400-seat theater maybe drops down to 65 to 70%. But still, most of them are majority nonprofit rental activity.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
I'm curious about how the breakdown of earned revenue and contributed revenue compares to other theaters in communities of our size. Is that model about the same breakdown as what we'd see in other communities?
I think in more communities, you typically would see the earned percentage a little bit higher. But as I said, this really is a unique project because it's so focused on helping emerging artists and smaller organizations have affordable access to good spaces. So I've really tried to keep that number down. Now, the problem with that is it essentially means that every year you've got to raise, in the first year, it's $750,000 to sustain the building, and by year 7, it's $1.5 million of annual fundraising. So we were with the funders this morning, and they were a bit concerned. Is this possible? How do we do this? But if you're serious about doing what you want to do, which is provide affordable access to great spaces, then there's going to be a big annual funding requirement to support that.
I recognize the data, and I don't want to discredit that, but just considering that all of those who were putting their dates on the 100-seat theater, those things could obviously also take place in a 200-seat theater. So I'm curious what the conversations were to justify doing 3 theaters as opposed to just the 200 and the larger. We would save $20 million.
So, well, I'm not sure I understand.
Were there conversations about considering just doing 2 theaters rather than 3, knowing that anything that could take place in a 100-seat theater could likely also take place in a 200-seat theater? So just combining all those activities into that one.
Right, well, that's part of the phasing approach, meaning you don't really need to go beyond phase 3. I mean, after you do get through phase 1 and you understand where the demand is strongest, phase 2 can reflect the demand that's emerging then, and then the next phase can reflect the demand that emerges after you've got those first 2. But you might not get to phase 3 or phase 4. The thing about putting 100-seat users into a 200-seat theater is just problematic because the rent is inevitably higher in a 200-seat theater, and there's so much sensitivity to that rental rate here that I think a lot of the groups that said 100 seats I can manage, I could just barely manage that financially, would be squeezed if we said, well, we'll just put you in the 200 seat.
So the 100 seat also looks like a more flexible space,
Right.
which would serve needs of a lot of groups in Chattanooga that don't need, like, dancers would want space, right? So is that the difference between the 100 and the 200 as well?
I think both of the smaller ones are pretty flexible, right, Ron?
So not
It's really only the 400 seat is really only the more fixed traditional proscenium theater. The first 2 are much more flexible spaces.
Yeah, the 200 showed in the diagram of the 200, it showed that was retractable seating, so it could retract back against the wall, and you have a full floor to do whatever you want.
But it still has a regular proscenium stage.
The 200 seat does not have a proscenium stage. No, it has legs that you can drop it. You can take the legs out. You can move it. It would have a catwalk above that allow you to adjust whatever curtains you have hanging or whatever. is in
What's the
front.
size of that stage, roughly?
Robert, is it like 40 by 60, something like that?
It should be, 30 feet deep
Yeah.
and 50 feet wide.
Yeah, something like that.
If we found a building, if a building was found that had the ability to put 300-seat spaces, that may be the way that the project goes. It really depends on what's found. And I really think those smaller spaces are rehearsal rooms as well as performance spaces.
Yes. I
So
agree.
a lot of this is going to be just finding the way the project wants to move and what buildings, what spaces become available. I think what we hear loud and clear, smaller is needed. We need rehearsal spaces and small performance spaces. So
And I would add
let's not say that that's
flexibility, too.
a solid, you have to do 100, you have to do 200. It's really, it's going to evolve different.
I have a question for John. When you had the phases up with the pricing,
Yeah.
is that for construction of the building alone, or would that be also like the 400-seat theater? I think you had at between 20 and 29.5 million. Would that include the full lighting package and sound and all of the seats? Or is that just building the building, or is that total?
That would be the equipment as well. It does not include soft costs. Soft costs are professional fees, testing that would need to happen,
Yeah.
the acquisition of the property, any loan, if there's a loan that's taken out, the debt to that loan is not in that number. It's just construction and all the equipment that would go into the buildings.
Yeah. And then my other question, maybe this is more for you, Duncan, is so when we go on tour and we rent out theater spaces, there's the initial cost. There's the cost for not 24 hours, but there's the cost for 8 hours. So theoretically, in a 100-seat theater, that'd be $300 for that 8-hour period. And if you need more time in the day, then there's extra time, and then there's additional crew costs. So like, for instance, when we looked at a theater, it was $1,600 for the day, but it came to a total cost of over $6,000 between the crew costs and additional theater box office costs. So I just want to be careful that no one walks out thinking, I'm going to pay $300 and that's all it's going to cost me, because as we've seen from our experience is it says 300 and then you get an invoice for what's gonna be 2,700, and now those $20, $30 tickets that you were selling aren't gonna cover the cost of the artists that are performing.
Those nasty buildings. So the way that, so we have, you'll see in the pro forma, when you see it, there's rental income and then there's a line item for user fees, which are all the other things that I've described,
Okay.
whether it's crew or extra lighting and stuff. In my pro forma, the user costs represent about 2/3 of the base rental costs. So, right, so as opposed to, so if your base rent was 6 plus all the user fees, it might be 9.
Okay.
Yes?
I'd like to maybe understand your total funding strategy. So I understand there's going to be fundraising for the community, there's going to be rental space, and whatever you get from the audience. But in terms of the initial build, where do you project all that funding will be coming?
So we are not fundraising consultants, and we kind of keep a firewall between us and what they do. But the point of the work we've done is that there are 3 deliverables. There's a market study, a physical plan, a business plan, and then budgets that are both capital budgets and operating budgets. And that is the information that a fundraiser, whether you hire a firm to do a fundraising feasibility or somebody locally, or you set up a campaign committee, that's the information that they need to go out to the funding community and say, what is the lead give potential for a project like this? And they build those funding pyramids and figure out the lead, and then they figure out the size of the pyramid. We're not doing that.
So there's no, is there any state funding possible, or is that still in there? Maybe.
We're not making any assumptions about where the capital comes from.
Okay, thank you.
Sir?
So your full build out of around 70 million, as you just described it, doesn't include land costs, soft costs, and any of the carrying costs, which would add another 30% to take it close to 100 million.
So, doesn't include land, doesn't include some of the other soft costs.
Right.
Carrying costs, meaning
Your borrowing costs,
no borrowing.
so you're talking 100 million.
Well, I think,
no.
I think you jumped to a high number, on the low range.
30% without land
Well,
costs.
I'm talking about construction costs, you started at
Right.
70 million and added on that. I mean, this building could be at $40 million,
Okay.
it could be less than that, depending on what is actually required by you all in the spaces. So this is not necessarily a $70 million project. It depends on the property you buy, the building that if it's an existing building and what you put in it. So I just want to be clear on that.
It could be a $70 million project, but what we're advocating with this approach is probably unreasonable to try and do that. So let's come up with a phased project where, okay, we've got a $20 million project, and that's followed by a $15 million project, and that's followed by another $25 million project. We think that these pieces can work in phases. It's a little bit more expensive when you add pieces to a building or to a campus, but we suspect that that approach is the smarter one here because it gives you the ability to start small with small campaigns, succeed, build momentum, start another campaign, add a phase, more success, and keep going that way.
What was the research on the use of rehearsal space during the day, Monday through Friday? Or are most of these rehearsal spaces going to be activated in the evening?
I didn't break down daytime versus evening utilization, but for example, in rehearsal room 1, 2,000 square feet, in year 1, there are 200 4-hour rentals. So I kept it very conservative about the amount of utilization and then growing that slowly over time. And it's the same, pretty much the same in the other spaces. So, I'm sorry, I should have done 200 2-hour rentals from nonprofits and another 75 rentals on the part of commercial users.
But no breakdown between
Dave?
how many are using it at night versus half of them are using during the day.
I mean, you could have, in those spaces, you could have 1,200 2-hour rentals.
Yeah.
So I wanted to keep that pretty conservative, just financially. So what do you think? Are you ready? Is it gonna work? Do you see a way forward, or do you want to be involved?
After the theater people and the dancers all kill each other, who actually gets to use the space?
Right. So, yeah, so important point. So I think, you know, we got good feedback in our session. There are ways that buildings can manage scheduling and priorities and how the calendar gets filled. I worked on a great project in Houston called Match, which is 5 little performance spaces with about 30 different groups. And they've got great protocols and that keep everybody, they're still grumpy, but they're not necessarily at each other's throats. So there are ways to do it. All right, terrific. Well, thank you all for coming.
Yes. And let's thank our consultants for doing such a thorough job. And the conversation doesn't have to stop here, and frankly, it shouldn't stop here. If you have any questions after this, you're welcome to email me. And if you respond to any of our newsletters that you get, that also comes to me. So, but my email is blake@artsbuild.com. I just want to thank all of you so much for being here and participating in this process. And I also want to remind you or inform you that we have performing arts gatherings every other month, where it's just a time for the performing arts groups to get together, connect, talk about the challenges that we face, but also, you know, the joys that we face or experience. And we also want to make sure that we promote collaboration, that we are just in community together so we can better serve the broader community. So I encourage you to get involved. I know we're looking at huge buildings and huge numbers. You know, if and when that happens, amazing, but we can start doing things now as a performing arts community. There are things that we need to do now that would set us up for success with this, but it starts with getting together and starting those conversations and collaborations. So anyway, thank you all so much for coming. Please take snacks on your way out. And also, if you didn't sign in at the front desk, please sign in. It helps us know who's here, and we like that data. So thank you all so much.
Blake, thank you for your work on this